Coming at number 10 now, we have surveillance cameras. This is a very literal way of watching you, of course. Governments all over the world install cameras in public places to deter crime. It's estimated there are over 350 million surveillance cameras in the world. That works out to around 1 camera for every 20 people on Earth. America and the FBI are included in this. Of course, the FBI isn't sitting there monitoring public surveillance cameras all day, every day. The watching is usually done afterwards. If they know you were in a busy public place on a certain day and at a certain time, they can probably find a camera to take a closer look. Next up at number 9 now, we have computer cameras. By this I mean computers, laptops, phones, tablets, anything you use that has a camera that could be tapped into by the government and used to watch you. The whole putting tape over your webcam thing did become a little bit of a meme over the years, but there may actually be some truth to this. In 2013, a report by the Washington Post revealed that the FBI has the ability to activate webcams for investigations if they have permission to do so from a judge. To get that, they'd need a warrant and probable cause. So as long as you guys aren't doing anything illegal, you shouldn't have to worry about tape. Next up at number 8 now, we have electronic toll collectors. Here's one some of you guys might not be aware of. Electronic toll collectors have become more popular in recent years. A person drives up to a toll booth on a major road and pays using special cards that deduct the price from their prepaid balance. However, it also keeps a record of when and where the transaction occurred. A lot of people have raised concerns about who has access to that information. Governments could theoretically track people's whereabouts without ever having to see them or request a court order. Coming in number 7 now, we have location tracking. 20 years ago, if you told people that they have the option to have their every move tracked and the information given to big companies who can do what they want with it, most people would have said, no way, are you crazy? These days though, that's exactly what most of us do with location services on our phones. Apps will often request to know your exact GPS location in order to improve their services for you. Now, while that may be true, some people find it quite worrying that the government and companies can use that to track you through GPS. Sometimes you don't even need to give permission, simply having a phone on you is more than enough. Moving on to number 6 now, we have TVs. Now, I didn't include this one in the computer watching number because I felt like it needed its own space. There is a growing concern around the world that this new wave of smart TVs have the ability to spy on you using the built-in camera and microphone. A WikiLeaks release revealed that Samsung smart TV owners were at risk of being spied on by the government. The documents made reference to a program called Weeping Angel, an attack designed by America's CIA and the UK's MI5 to make Samsung smart TVs look like they are turned off when in reality they could be watching and listening to everything in the room. With over 40 million smart TVs in the US alone, this could become a hotly discussed topic in the future of surveillance. Next up at number 5 now, we have wiretaps. Wiretapping is a form of spying by listening in on a person's communications. Historically, it got its name because it involved an electrical tap on a telephone line. Over the years though, the term wiretapping has sometimes encompassed more forms of communication such as email and text messaging. Now, under American law, a federal intelligence agency such as the FBI can get approval for wiretaps from a special court or from the Attorney General. The FBI has to jump through a lot of hoops if they want to wiretap you though, and they have to prove to a court that you are probably committing a very serious crime. The list of crimes is quite long though, and ranges from the gravely serious such as terrorism to the just plain illegal misuse of passports. Coming in number 4 now, we have biometric information. More and more companies are using fingerprints, eye scanners and voice recognition as a secure verification tool. Well, governments like where this is going. You may have had your eye or fingerprint scanned into the system when you first arrived in another country. I know I did when I first visited the US. Between company records and the government's own, it could be possible one day to see where you are at every single minute of the day. Next up at number 3 now, we have business records. Like a few of the other ones on our list, this doesn't involve physically watching you, but in this day and age, that's kind of an old-fashioned way of thinking about it. The Patriot Act was created in the wake of 9/11 and involved a lot of changes to what the American government could or couldn't legally do when investigating terrorism. One of these changes allows the FBI to obtain a person's bank statements, library records, medical records, business papers, and basically any other paper trail that they might have. Some people are shocked to find out that the FBI doesn't even need to show probable cause to request this information. Next up at number 2 now, we have license plate readers. Now, you guys may have seen these before, cameras that are specifically designed to snap pictures of a car's license plate, and by that I mean every single car that passes, not just the criminals' cars. At a rate of thousands per minute, these readers collect the license plate number, date, time and location of of every single scan. Civil liberties groups in America have complained that this indiscriminate monitoring is not okay for people who aren't a threat. As these cameras become more numerous, there may even be no road where the government doesn't know where you are. Finally, number 1 now, we have internet browsing. Let's talk about cookies, and not the fun kind. Many websites retain information about you, your location, and your browsing history. These so-called cookies are then fed into huge databases so that market analysis companies can then figure out how to better sell products to you. A byproduct of this is that the FBI can request this information for an investigation. They can watch back a person's entire internet history and where they went in the online world. In this day and age, perhaps that's more important than seeing where you physically are.
Coming in at number 10, we have the escape from Alcatraz. Now, if there's one place you didn't want to end up if you did something rotten, it's Alcatraz. We've all heard of it, the inescapable island used as a prison for extreme convicts in the USA. That is until June 2nd, 1962, when 3 men somehow did the unimaginable: escape Alcatraz. Brothers John and Frank Anglin, along with Frank Morris, all escaped this island, and to this day, the mystery remains, you guessed it, unsolved. Apparently, they had an arts and crafts club in Alcatraz because the men had made dummies out of plaster, flesh-colored paint, and real human hair designed to make them look asleep. They were pretty good. As soon as guards discovered they were missing, the whole place shut down and they began their search. Fortunately for the investigation, but unfortunately for the guy who got left behind. One of them didn't make it out in time, so he helped fill in the gaps. The group began planning in December and fashioned a makeshift drill out of a broken vacuum and loosened the vents at the back of their cells. After sneaking out through the vents, they ran down a typically unguarded corridor and made their way to the rooftop towards their secret workshop. They used over 50 raincoats to fashion makeshift life vests and a rubber raft to help them cross the shark-infested water surrounding the island. They also built wooden paddles and used a musical instrument as a way of inflating the raft. Navigating through a series of shafts to get to the rear of the cell house, the men then climbed over the fence with their gear and sailed away to freedom. So to be fair, they did find out how the men made their escape, but whether they actually made it remains a mystery. Their plan once they got to land included stealing clothes in a car, but no thefts were made. Since their escape, no trace of them has ever been found. Coming in at number 9, we have the anthrax scare. This was a case that the FBI let in right through the front door and still couldn't solve it. Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle had no idea what was about to happen next when he received a letter on October 15th, 2001. Unbeknownst to him, this letter was laced with anthrax, a serious infectious disease. The worst part was he wasn't the only one to receive a letter like this, and 5 people died and 13 people fell ill via these mail attacks. Some even suspect that even more people received these letters but did not fall ill due to the poor quality of the anthrax. The next few years would consist of many lawsuits, and they still had no clear idea of who the culprit might be. That is until Bruce Ivins, a government scientist and suspect, committed suicide. They thought they had him, but even a pool of scientists couldn't confirm that Ivins indeed did it. They still don't know to this day. And coming in at number 8, missing Tammy J. Swickey. Almost 30 years ago, the case of Tammy J. remains unsolved and is still undergoing investigation. Investigators hope that by using updated technology, they may be able to uncover new clues regarding her murder. In August of 1992, Tammy's Pontiac was found abandoned on the side of the road, and her body was later discovered in Missouri, 500 miles away. Despite over 200 pieces of physical evidence, they still can't uncover a single trace of who her killer was. The only piece of significant DNA they found was a beer can nearby, but there was no one they could match the DNA to in their criminal database. Even still, the police are unsure as to whether it even relates to the case. The closest they've come to finding the killer was when officers arrested Clark Perry Baldwin, a 58-year-old man they tied to 3 murders and potentially a 4th he committed between Tennessee and Wyoming. But still, in many regards, the murder of Tammy J. remains open. We have to talk about the Black Dahlia. January 15th, 1947, the severed body of 22-year-old aspiring actress Elizabeth Short was found by a mother and child going for a walk in LA. She would later be dubbed the Black Dahlia, as Elizabeth was often noted to wear black clothing and because of the movie Blue Dahlia, which was out at the time. Despite the harm done to the body, it was obvious that she was not killed where she was found, as there was no blood at the crime scene. Due to the precision and apparent expertise of the murder, many investigators believe it had to be someone in a medical field. But sadly, Sadly, despite a massive manhunt and countless investigations, the culprit was never found. But even to this day, many people remain passionate about uncovering the true murderer. Steve Hodel, for example, a retired Los Angeles police detective, has developed a captivating case that the murderer was indeed his own father, George Hodel. George Hodel was an impressive doctor in his field, but left his son and family behind when Steve was 9. When Steve found old photos in a bound wooden case of a woman with a striking resemblance to Short, he had to investigate. Despite the evidence he has produced, no one can really claim for sure Dr. Hodel was the murderer. But what if? Cold Valley disappearances. Lewis Clark Valley was nicknamed Cold Valley after a string of disappearances from 1979 to 1982 left the country astounded. 5 people disappeared, but only 3 of the bodies were ever found with no culprit to name. The first of the disappearance was Christina White, who never arrived home, and her schoolwork was found scattered on the outskirts of Osoden. She and her bike were never found. Then Kristen David never finished her bike ride from Moscow, Idaho to Lewis Clark Valley, and her body was discovered by a fisherman who found it floating in a garbage bag in Snake River. Then sisters Nelson and Brandy Miller disappeared while walking to the grocery store, while Stephen Purcell, a friend of the 2 women, also disappeared that night. The bodies of the sisters were found off the side of a highway near Kendrick, Idaho. FBI and the police believe the cases to be linked due to the similarities the victims shared, and Detective Nichols believes that all evidence points to one perpetrator, but she won't reveal his name until enough evidence has been found. But that's just the problem, there's barely any evidence to collect. Despite Nichols' beliefs, some investigators believe there were different killers, but no one can be sure. The case remains unsolved to this day. The Berkshire UFO sighting. Now we've talked about the cases the FBI couldn't solve, but what about the ones they didn't want to? This is one of the most famous alien abductions the world has ever seen, and no one can really deny it. In 1969, Tom Reed in Berkshire, Massachusetts was riding in the car with his brother, mother, and grandmother. As they were crossing the Sheffield Bridge, they caught sight of some mysterious lights coming up from behind them. Suddenly, the environment changed, and it felt like they were in the middle of the hurricane. Next thing, they remembered they were back in the car, his mother and grandmother had switched places, and realized that over 2 hours had passed. All they could recall were images of being in a hangar with people around. Several eyewitnesses also saw the lights, and even a few media outlets covered the phenomenon. But what's even creepier is that a memo written by Guy Hoddle, the head of the field office in Washington, wrote a report in 1950, 10 years earlier, that stated that 3 flying saucers were recovered in New Mexico, but the FBI never followed up on it. Could it be that these flying saucers had something to do with the mysterious events of Tom Reed, or was there a reason the FBI didn't give this case the attention it deserved? Guess we won't know, will we? Coming in at number 7, the LaSalle Street murders. There's a lot of murder, I'm sorry guys, but it's here. In 1971, Bob Gurse, Bob Hinson, and James Barker were all found murdered at their home. Their only hint? A bloody footprint left behind. The 3 men all worked together, and considering there were no signs of breaking and entering, the police then assumed that they also knew the murderer. Upon their first interrogations, their primary suspect became Theodore B. Uland, who said he last spoke to Hinson at 9 and Gurse at 9:30. Hinson and Gurse had both worked for him, and police began to suspect that Uland had financial motivations, as he blamed the men for stealing equipment, and that he had a life insurance policy out on his 2 former employees. It was discovered that Hinson, Gurse, and Barker all were notorious parties who left a series of lovers in their wake. It was then considered that perhaps a jealous lover or husband took revenge on the 3 men. They then discovered that one of those women visited the house around 1 a.m. but left when there was no answer. The biggest obstacle to this case was the lack of technology, as the police were not equipped with forensics at this time, which meant that the amount of legwork that they were required to do slowed the case down substantially. As a result, the murders remain unsolved. Coming in at number 3, the Hall Mills murder. Investigators initially thought that this 1920s case was a lover's quarrel gone wrong, but no sooner did things get a lot more complicated. In 1922, Reverend Edward W. Hall, who was a pastor in New Brunswick, and Eleanor R. Mills were found murdered. Their bodies were discovered lying side by side, dressed very neatly, near a crabapple tree, a spot considered ideal for lovers. Torn love letters were scattered among their perfectly placed bodies, and they soon found out that the letters were addressed to each other. Both Eleanor and Edward were married, however, so as news of their ardent romance hit the tabloids, the town went wild. The police were confident. They were like, this is easy, we're gonna solve this in 2 days tops. 4 years later, still nothing. His wife was accused, who suspiciously had some of her clothes sent off and re-dyed. His rich brother with a short fuse was a suspect. The only witness was a woman named Jane Gibson, who said she saw 4 people but the crabapple tree after following a suspicious figure around her farm nearby. She then heard a gunshot, followed by screams of a woman. But then her story started changing here and there, and anyways, enough people were accused that they really never got straight down to the story. So I guess sadly, we will never know. Coming in at number 2. The Tylenol tamperings. This next mystery inspired the phrase, "do not use if seal is broken." The Tylenol murders of 1982 changed the game. 12-year-old Mary Kellerman complained of a sore throat one morning, so her parents gave her one extra strength Tylenol. Unbeknownst to them, however, it was laced with cyanide, and sadly Mary passed away. What soon followed was a series of Tylenol-related deaths, all including cyanide poisoning. Fortunately, any bottles containing traces of the substances were removed before anyone else made this deadly mistake, but police still wondered how. The only link they found was a man named James Lewis who wrote a ransom letter for $1 million to Johnson & Johnson claiming to be the killer, but considering he had no relationship to Chicago, which is where the murders took place, he was instead charged with extortion. But still, police believe that someone must have taken the bottles off the shelves and tampered with them, but the case remains unsolved. And last but not least, we have the Zodiac Killer. If you're a fan of all cases cold, well then you've heard of the Zodiac Killer. I mean, there's a movie about it. Between 68 and 69, the Zodiac Killer chose 7 victims in the northern part of California, and luckily 2 victims survived. This cryptic killer gained notoriety by plaguing investigators with ciphers, threats, letters, and information. The Zodiac even phoned the police and admitted to the killings. He loved the attention and threatened to collect more victims should the police not allow his ciphers to be published. The Zodiac Killer is said to have claimed over 37 lives, though no further victims have been found since 1969. This publicity-obsessed murderer left police chilled and confused and continues to boggle minds of investigators to this day.
Starting off this countdown, we have the double agent. One of the FBI's biggest concerns is having a double agent a part of their team, and this happened to them multiple times. One time was in 1962. So a KGB agent known as Alexei Kulak walked into the FBI office. Now this was a bold move for him because just 3 blocks away was the Soviet UN mission. An FBI agent asked him if he was worried that they were watching the FBI building, and he replied with, "No, all of your people are out covering a meeting with your guy Dick." And that one sentence started a lengthy investigation. Who was Dick? Clearly, they thought he was a double agent. They spent decades trying to find this spy on their staff. At first, they interviewed anyone named Dick or Richard, while trying to keep everything hush-hush so that the mole wouldn't find out. They went through thousands of agents and spent countless hours trying to find this man. To this day, the FBI is maintaining its silence on this. Moving on to number 9, we have Ricky McCormick. On June 30th, 1999, the body of Ricky McCormick was found in a cornfield in West Alton, Missouri. In his pocket were 2 pages of handwritten notes. The notes were written in a complex cipher. They consisted of a number of random letters and numbers. The FBI believes that, and I quote, "breaking this code could reveal the victim's whereabouts before his death and could lead to the solution of a homicide." However, so far it's been impossible to crack. The FBI does believe that Ricky was murdered, and we still don't know why or by who. In our 8th spot, we have Jerome Azell. On November 7th, 2017, Jerome Azell was reported missing in Lansing, Michigan. Later, police found his car, but there were no signs of Jerome. That was until over a month later. On December 12th, 2018, Jerome was found dead in a wooden area. Foul play is suspected. To this day, no one knows what happened to him. The FBI is offering up to $10,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the individual or individuals responsible for the murder of Jerome. In our 7th spot, we have Operation Ghost Stories. Around the early 2000s, the FBI learned that there were multiple sets of Russian spies in the US posing as everyday Americans. That's when Operation Ghost Stories came into play, and this was one of the largest counterintelligence investigations in history. In the end, it led to the arrest of 10 agents by 2010, and this was not an easy thing to do. Nonetheless, learning about potential spies is one thing that the FBI fears. Coming in at number 6, we have the Zodiac Killer. Just last year, it was announced that the infamous serial killer known as the Zodiac Killer was identified. However, the supposed killer, a man named Gary Francis Port, died in 2018. But the FBI clearly knows something that we don't know, because shortly after they shut down the claim that Gary was the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is believed to be responsible for at least 5 murders in Northern California from 1968 to 1969. But the killer would write notes and taunt the police and claim to have killed as many as 37 people. this has been a cold case forever. The FBI says that the case is still open and shut down any claims that the killer was identified. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Cliven Bundy. This was a huge scandal for the FBI as they were found to be withholding and destroying key evidence in this case. So basically in 2014, Bundy and his sons and supporters were involved in an armed standoff with the Bureau of Land Management due to unpaid cattle grazing fees and restrictions. In January of 2018, a federal judge threw out all the criminal charges against Bundy. A part of this was due to the fact that the FBI misplaced or hid a thumb drive with key evidence to this case. It's very messy, and the FBI got in huge trouble for it. In our 4th spot today, we have the Russians. During Trump's presidency, the FBI actually opened a case to look into whether Trump was actually working alongside the Russians or not. And if he wasn't, they knew he was badly compromised. They said that he was compromised for, and I quote, his questionable business dealings, the hush money paid on his behalf to silence women, shady transactions at his charity, and most importantly, his lies about his Russian dealings, including his secret 2015 effort to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, even as he told the world that he had no business with Russia. So Trump's secret ties with Russia and Putin certainly had the FBI concerned. In our 3rd spot today, we have Pizzagate. In March 2016, the personal Gmail account of a former White House chief of staff and chair of Hillary Clinton's 2016 US presidential campaign was hacked, and his emails revealed some pretty disturbing things. They believe that Hillary and other people of power are part of a trafficking ring. In the emails, they used code words like pizza, cheese pizza, and hot dogs. Seems weird. Like the emails say things like, and I quote, "I'm dreaming about your hot dog stand in Hawaii." Clearly, there's a hidden message there. Another email said Obama spent $65K on pizza and hot dogs. Again, probably another coded message. Whatever was going on, the FBI was concerned, and they were on the case trying to decipher the emails and get down to the bottom of what was really going on. Coming in at number 2, we have Alcatraz. In June of 1962, 3 inmates, John Anglin, his brother Clarence, and Frank Morris, escaped Alcatraz Supermax prison. They put dummy heads that they had made of plaster and flesh-tone paint in their beds to fool the night guards. They then crawled through ventilation ducts between their sinks that they had been widening for quite some time and got out into an unmonitored corridor and then hopped over the cell wall. They then used a raft that they made using over 50 raincoats, among other stolen and donated materials, and they set off into the waters. The prisoners were never caught. For 17 years, the FBI worked on this case, trying to figure out if the escapees survived or if they were on the run. They officially closed the case on December 31st, 1979. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Alonzo Brooks. On April 3rd, 2004, Alonzo Brooks disappeared after attending a house party with his friends. He was supposed to get a ride home with his friends, but one of the friends got lost on a trip to buy cigarettes and never returned back to give Brooks a ride back home. That evening, he never returned home. The following day, his boots and hat were found across the street from the home where the party took place. The local sheriff's department and Kansas State investigators searched the area in the following days, but found nothing. That was until May 1st. Alonzo's family decided to take matters into their own hands and to search the area themselves. And that's when they found Alonzo's body. Rumor has it that his body was being preserved in a freezer while police were out searching for him and then later dumped there. Several years later, the FBI announced that they were reinvestigating the case, and a new autopsy concluded that Alonzo's cause of death was homicide. So now the hunt is on to find Alonzo's killer or killers. Someone knows who did it and they're not speaking up.